Get you a place to write notes here. Let me make this full screen. We're going to be talking about something new today that you've never done before, and I'm going to give you this piece of paper to keep notes on. We are going to be having a quiz over it next week, so it is going to be important that you pay attention and kind of understand what we're doing today. But like I said, this is something you've not studied before. Maybe a little. There's a portion of it you probably talked about last year when you read Romeo and Juliet, but not the big picture. Specifically, we're talking about rhythm today. And you'll be so excited to know that there are actually names for the different types of rhythms in poetry. So take your notes on this sheet of paper, and this will be a good study guide for you. Okay, what we're talking about, the technical word for it is scansion. When you scan a line of poetry, that's the skill that you're going to be learning today, how to scan a line of poetry. You can see the word scan here at the beginning of that word scansion. It's the dividing a verse into feet by indicating accents and counting syllables to determine the meter. Meter, or rhythm, is your beat. You guys are familiar with that term. If you're in band, you understand what a beat is. And meter is a formal pattern. There are actually patterns of rhythm. There's actually patterns of rhythm that poets use. Now, not all poems have rhythm. But those that do have a rhythm, if there's a pattern to it, you need to figure out what that pattern is. And we're going to look at the 4 most common meters, or the 4 most common patterns of rhythm today. And hopefully teach you how to identify them. Okay. The first pattern of rhythm is called iamb or iambic. And this is the most common because it's your heartbeat. And it's a very natural rhythm, and it is the most used rhythm of all of them. And basically the rhythm is an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. Now, when I'm going to mark these, I'm just going to use a dash. I'm going to use those 2 marks. If you look at a book or a dictionary, they actually use this one for the unaccented syllable, but I'm just going to use a straight line. So straight line means you're not stressing the syllable. The dash means you do stress the syllable. So if we look at this first poem here, the sun that brief December day was cheerless over hills of gray. And if you listen to the rhythm, it's the sun that brief December day was cheerless over hills of gray. There's a pattern to it. And if you were to mark it, you would go, the sun that breathed. How many syllables are in December? How many syllables? It has 3 syllables, so it's going to have 3 marks. That breathed December day. Rose cheerless over hills of gray. So cheerless has 2 syllables. It's going to have 2 marks. Over has 2 syllables. It's going to have 2 marks. So every syllable is either stressed or unstressed, and you have to listen to it. The sun that brief December day was cheerless over hills of gray. You're going to hear that pattern. No, mine big. Okay, right. And that's what you have to listen for. You have to listen for that rhythm. So that's called iamb or iambic. Again, it's your heartbeat. Dun 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 dun. Very common, very natural rhythm. Okay, the next one is called trochee or trochee. Again, I guess it's kind of the opposite, because it starts out with a stressed syllable followed by an unstressed. Now, I didn't write out the words here, but stressed followed by an unstressed is the pattern here. And this is the first line from Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary. So if we were marking it, you would go, once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary. Again, every syllable has a mark. Midnight has 2 syllables. Dreary has 2 syllables. Weary has 2 syllables. Another thing you might notice is words like and of are hardly ever stressed. The is not stressed. That is not stressed. You'll see the word and here is not stressed. And if you're finding you're stressing those words, you'll probably have the wrong rhythm. But our pattern is stressed, unstressed, stressed, unstressed, and so on.
Don't stress and.
Well, typically, they're usually not stressed. Okay. All right, the third one is called anapest or anapestic. And it is two unstressed followed by a stress. It's dun 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 dun. And it's a lot, it's kind of a fast beat. It's used a lot in children's rhymes, like 'twas the night before Christmas, and all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. Dun 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 dun. So that's Anapest. So if we marked it, 'twas the night before Christmas, and well, I got something wrong here. Never mind, I'm gonna erase that. I'm gonna fix it. Before Christmas, and all through the house. I'm still not right. Yeah. I'm like, what am I doing here? I forgot what my rhythm was. 'Twas the night before Christmas, and all through the house. There we go. 'Twas the night before Christmas, and all through the house, not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. I'm going to shrink this up a little bit so I can get the whole page on here. Can you see that? Oh shoot! It didn't take my my marks with it. Dang it! I should have been thinking. We'll have to remark those. Okay, I'm gonna scroll up and I'll just remark those when we need them. All right, I'm gonna clear my ink here, and as I said, I'm gonna remark this here in a little bit. Okay, the last one is probably the least used of all of them. It's the one you will find the least. And it is the most awkward of them, I guess I would say. It's stress, unstressed, stress, unstressed. So it's da 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 da. And it is the least natural. So this one would be take her up tenderly, lift her with care. Fashion so slenderly, young and so fair. Da 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 da. Again, it's the least natural of all of them, and it is the least used of all of them. You won't find that many examples of dactyl. In fact, I had a hard time finding some to put on your test. So, now, let's see. We're going to come back and talk about these things here in a little bit. All right, just turn your paper over. We're going to put some notes on the back of the paper. I need to go pull I need to get my notebook up here. Okay, so you figured out what your meter is, you know what your rhythm is. The next thing you have to do is you have to count it. And I'm going to give you the names for the words. A unit of rhythm is called a foot. 1 unit of rhythm is called a foot. So if in a line of poetry you have 1 foot of the rhythm, it's called monometer. If you have 2 feet of the rhythm, it's called dimeter. If you have 3 feet, it's called trimeter. 4 feet is called tetrameter. The one for 5 is the one you might have heard of, especially if you guys studied this when you did Romeo and Juliet last year. It's called pentameter. 6 feet is called hexameter. 7 feet is called septimeter. Those of you in French might recognize the word sept there. Sept. And 8 feet is called octameter. And you probably aren't going to have a line longer than that. Now, this will all make sense here shortly. Everybody have that?
No.
Okay, I'll let you get that written down. Here's some rubber bands when you get the little groups done.
Sure they're right names.
What?
Sure they're right names.
Okay. Does everyone have those notes down?
No.
No, not yet? Okay.
Isn't it kind of the same in geometry, hexagon?
There's other, like there's bi and di and tetra. What's another one? Quad for 4. And I get a lot of people use the different root words, but you need to learn these because there's other root words for.
But see, I don't see that name here on the sixth.
Maybe he didn't get turned in. I don't know. I just turned him in.
I'll go check real quick.
Okay, everybody have this now? All right, we're going to go back to our page of poetry.
Is this even a kid here?
Yeah, it is.
Is it really?
Yeah. I can find my page of poetry. Where is it?
A really big one. I wanted something to shine.
Okay, I've got this where I have the whole thing on here so we can kind of do this together. All right, you need to go back to the front, and I'm going to show you how this works. So our first meter we said was iambic. I'm going to remark this here. Whoops, I'm already in front. The sun that breathed December day rose cheerless over hills of gray.
Spirit mom.
All right, so let's look at this now. We're going to count the feet. How many units of rhythm are in that line? So a unit, 1 iamb is an unstressed stress. That's 1 unit. So you want to find out how many units are in a line. How many times is that pattern repeated? So if we look here on this first one, we've got a unit here, 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 and here. So we have 4 iambs. 1, 2, 3, 4. So if I told you to scan this line of poetry, which is what you're going to do on this quiz next week, if I said scan this line of poetry, your answer is, you're going to tell me what rhythm it is and how many times it's repeated. So your answer is, well, this poem is written in iambic. And what's it called when there's 4 units? Tetrameter. And if you look at the next line, we have 1, 2, 3, and 4. Most of the time, they will keep the same number of units. Not always. Sometimes they maybe have another extra beat or something in a line. But this poem is written in iambic tetrameter. And if I told someone that knows rhythm, they would go, okay, it's unstressed stress, and that's repeated 4 times. All right, so let's look at the trochee one. So we have your unit here is stressed, unstressed. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So if I ask you on a test to scan this line of poetry, what's your answer going to be? Trochaic octameter. Trochaic octameter. That is the pattern of rhythm and how many times it's repeated. All right, so let's look at the Anapest one. We have, the pattern is unstressed, unstressed, stress. So we've got 1, 2, 3, and 4. So what would this be called? Anapestic tetrameter. Anapestic tetrameter. Okay? And then we have our dactyl, which is stressed, unstressed, unstressed. So we have 1, 2, 3. But then we have this stressed here at the end. Is that a whole pattern? No, it's not a whole unit of rhythm. And if we look down here, we have the same thing. We've got 1, 2, whoops, 3, and then we have that extra stress at the end. Now there's a name for this, and it's called a spondee. A spondee is when you have 2 stress beats together. And it's done for a break in the sound. It can be used in any rhythm. And so if you look, it goes da 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 da, or da 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 da, and there's stress, and then we come back here and we have a stress. So we have 2 stress beats together, stressed here and stressed here. But they do it for a break in the sound. Da 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 da. Because sometimes the rhythm gets to be too much, and it's a way to break up the rhythm by putting that spondee in there. And that's what they did. So if this were on the test, you would say it is dactylic. And how many dactyls are there?
3.
There's 3, so it would be dactylic trimeter with a spondee. So you would go ahead and say that there is a spondee. Dactylic trimeter with a spondee. I'm going to tell you, and I don't know, some people just get this. They hear the rhythm automatically. They read a line and they pick up the rhythm. This is kind of one of those tests where I have a lot of people do really well on it, and I have some people that just struggle. They can't hear the rhythm. But I'm going to give you before we have the quiz, I'm going to give you a study guide to practice and kind of give you some pointers and some things that will help you. And one of those things is to look at the little words like and the. If you're stressing those, you probably have the wrong rhythm. That's kind of one secret. But just listen to it and be sure to look at all the syllables as well. Now I have 2 other definitions here at the bottom. The first definition, yes.
That spondee do or whatever.
Uh-huh.
How did you determine that?
Because it's not a full dactyl, because a full dactyl should have 2 more unstressed. If you go right to the next line, it's followed right by another stressed syllable. So that makes 2 in a row. Because when you're reading it, it's take her up
So it
to
doesn't
lift her
keep
with
your pattern.
care. Fashion, so it's limited. Huh?
So it doesn't keep the pattern.
Yeah, it just doesn't keep the pattern. Yeah, it's like an incomplete unit, basically. Okay, I've got 2 other definitions here at the bottom that are kind of important when you're talking about rhythm. Blank verse. This you might have talked about when you read Romeo and Juliet last year. Shakespeare wrote all of his plays in what's called blank verse. And blank verse is unrhymed iambic pentameter. Unrhymed iambic pentameter. And now that we know what this is, we should understand. So an iamb is what's the pattern? Unstressed, stress, and how many times is it repeated? 5 times. So if you just listen to one of his lines of his poem. But soft what light through yonder window breaks. But soft what light through yonder window breaks. That entire poem was written in iambic pentameter. Well, there's a few characters that didn't speak that way, huh? Story, yeah. This is great. But he did it for a reason. One of the reasons was back in those days that the actors had to do a lot of plays. Every night it was a different play. And by putting a rhythm to it, it made it easier for them to learn their lines. Now, you guys would probably disagree with that, but it did help them to learn their lines because there was that rhythm there. But it didn't rhyme. He did have some rhyming couplets, but for the most part, it didn't rhyme. But then we have something called free verse poetry, which is really very popular right now in the United States. Free verse poetry has no rhythm and no rhyme. And a lot of the real traditional poets say that that's kind of a cop-out, that's not really poetry because it's not that difficult to write. It's pretty difficult to write with rhythm, and you guys are going to have an opportunity to experience that later when we write a ballad. All right, does this make sense to you? All right, I want to talk about, just a few things I want to talk about rhythm here before we go on. Perfect rhythm isn't always a good thing, though. It can get a little bit redundant. And so poets do some things to break it up. One thing they would do is a spondee. Another thing that they might do is put a comma in the middle sentence, because what is that comma force you to do? It forces you to pause, so you don't get caught up in it. Or maybe they'll make the line extend to the next line. So there's a lot of things they do to kind of break up the rhythm. Who keeps the rhythm in the band? The percussion. And sometimes it's really strong. You can just hear it back there. But sometimes you really have to listen for it. It's a lot more subtle. And that's the same thing in poetry. Sometimes that rhythm is really, really strong and it's easy to hear. But other times, you know, like I think that 'Twas the Night Before Christmas and All Through the House, the rhythm is really strong in that poem. A lot of children's poetry, I think, is that way. But in other poems, you really have to listen for it, kind of like you do in the band. All right, I want to talk about sonnets here before I turn my recorder off, so that you can so I can get these notes on here. We read the sonnet the other day about shall I compare thee to a summer's day. So you can put this on the back with your other notes about monometer. We'll just add that to that. Okay, so the reason I didn't talk, we just paraphrased that sonnet was because I wanted to talk, because one of the things I wanted about a sonnet is relevant to what we talked about today. A sonnet has a very distinct structure to it. And one of the distinct things about a sonnet is it's 14 lines long. It's always 14 lines. And it is also iambic pentameter. Okay, so we just learned that today. It means that it is unstressed stress 5 times. It's written in iambic pentameter. So that makes writing a sonnet a little more challenging because you have to worry about the rhythm. It also consists of 3 quatrains. Who knows what a quatrain is? It's a 4-line stanza. And 1 couplet. And a couplet is a 2-line stanza. So if you add that up, of course, that would equal how many lines? 14 lines. The rhyme scheme of a Shakespearean sonnet is A, B, A, B.
That's Shakespearean.
These are Shakespearean sonnets. C, D, C, D. There's also Italian sonnets, but we're not reading that. E, F, E, F, and then G, G. So if you look, here's your first quatrain, your second quatrain, your third quatrain, and then your couplet. So the couplet rhymes, the last 2 lines rhyme. And usually the couplet kind of presents a conclusion to whatever was presented in the first 3 stanzas. And we're going to go back and look at that Shakespearean sonnet and kind of look at these different parts here shortly. I need to go turn my recording off. Hopefully we got a recording for all these people who are gone.
Ow. Sorry. Wow, there are a lot of people.
Wow.